And the Boston Red Sox are the world champions. For the first time in 86 years, the Red Sox have won baseball world championship. Can you believe it?
Tessie is the royal root is rally cry. Tessie is the tune they always sung. Tessie echoed April through October nights after serenade installed the name in yard.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to StraussNet Sports Radio. It is Sunday, April 3rd of 2022. We are days from the baseball season. That all starts Thursday. Obviously, with the lockout, it would have started just a little bit earlier, but here we are. We're past all that doom and gloom. We're going to have baseball in a few days. Just to recap what we heard on last time's episode, we had Tim Bradshaw on doing his NCAA bracket. He called it making bad decisions, and that was correct. A lot of us made some bad decisions. National title game is tomorrow. If Kansas wins, you will know that I lost one of my brackets, but if they lose, I will have won one of my brackets. The other pool I'm in, I did in fact win. I lost Kentucky in the first game, but came back with a strong final three, so to speak. So that's what we did last time. Now that March Madness will be over as it marched into April, it's ready for baseball season. I've got Marc Strauss with me today. For those of you who don't know, Marc Strauss is my dad, but it's not just having dad on the radio here. He has been involved in sports his whole life. Worked in Wisconsin, at the University of Wisconsin, has been on TV at the local NBC affiliate, covered many a baseball game, and that's kind of our area of expertise is the baseball world. So we're going to preview the season coming up here. A couple of Cardinal fans, but we definitely have our fingers in a lot of pools with fantasy baseball and whatnot. So here you go. We're on to the baseball preview.
All right, looking forward to it. Where do you want to start?
Well, let's take a look back to start with at last year. For those of you who remember, the Atlanta Braves defeated the Houston Astros in 6 games in the World Series. Other teams involved, the Red Sox lost the ALCS to the Astros. The Dodgers lost to the Braves. White Sox, Tampa, Milwaukee, San Francisco, Red Sox, Yankees, and Cardinals were all, I mentioned the Red Sox twice, but they were all involved in the playoffs as well. With the single game elimination wild card format, you have your 3 division winners in each league and 2 wild card teams that play each other to get to the division series. This year it's going to be a little bit different. We're going to take, it's 12 teams total, so 6 in each league?
6 in each league.
And the top 2 get a bye into the division series. The others will play, like the 2020 format, a best of 3 in one park to move on. So the top 2 division winners in each league don't have to participate. And time frame wise, we talked about this not on the show. Time frame wise, it doesn't really matter all that much. Some people will say, well, what about you taking a week off? Well, in the traditional format, all the division winners get that whole week off anyway for the couple of wild card games. So that shouldn't be a big deal for the teams with a bye. Unlike when we've talked about before, teams sweeping like an NLCS and then having to wait like a week to play in the World Series. So, new format, but let's take a look at where the standings kind of landed last year. And I'm going to do this the same way we're going to do it when we get to this year. We're going to go from East Division to West Division back to East. So we'll start in the AL East. We had the 100-win Tampa Bay Rays, followed by the 92-win Red Sox and Yankees. Same record, 92 and 70. The Red Sox ended up with the tiebreaker there to get home field advantage in the wild card game. We moved to the Central. The Chicago White Sox had 93 wins to win the division. No other team made it. The next best team was the Cleveland Indians, now Guardians, with 80 wins and 82 losses. The Houston Astros took the Western Division, 95 wins, followed by the Seattle Mariners, who barely missed the playoffs. They had 90 wins. They did make some improvements. We'll get to them. Heading out to the National League, the San Francisco Giants set the bar for all of baseball with 107 wins, and the Dodgers had to settle for a wild card game with 106 wins. They barely missed out on skipping that, but it didn't matter. They defeated the Cardinals in that wild card game and eventually lost to the Braves in the LCS. In the NL Central, the 95-win Milwaukee Brewers took the division home. St. Louis Cardinals, after a roller coaster season, ended up with a very nice winning streak to end the year and got into the playoffs in that one gamer with 90 wins, but it didn't get them anywhere. Atlanta Braves took home the division. That NL East was very interesting as it felt like everybody led that division at some point. Atlanta, with the 88 wins, was the only member of that division to go to the playoffs, followed by the 82-win Philadelphia Phillies. So, that kind of sets our stage. That's who was in it and who went to the playoffs. Do any of those teams stand out to you in terms of what they've done, where you think this team's way worse or this team's so much better?
Well, I think, first of all, the Astros lost Carlos Correa. Zach Greinke is no longer on their team. I don't think the Astros are as strong, but I think they are good enough, again, to win their division. I think they're going to get quite a push from the Seattle Mariners. They added Robbie Ray, and maybe some fans aren't familiar with a very highly regarded rookie that they have, Julio Rodriguez, who has literally, in spring training, hit his way into the lineup. I think he's going to wind up being their starting center fielder. And he's a really good player. He can hit for power. He has speed. He's a good defensive player. I don't know how well he's going to play center field, but he seems to be, he's only about 20 years old, but he seems very mature for his age. And I think that they're going to push the Astros. The Astros have a few missing pieces this year. Like I said, Carlos Correa is gone. They're going to rely a little bit on the back end of their rotation with some younger pitchers. And in terms of the bullpen, I don't think they're as stacked as they have been in recent years. So I think the Mariners have a chance to take that division, and that's going to be very interesting. The Braves are going to be interesting because even though Freddie Freeman is now a member of the Dodgers, they filled that hole with Matt Olson, and they've done a very good job there over the past couple of years of making sure that they have a deep lineup and bench. And, of course, the acquisition of Kenley Jansen as their closer makes their bullpen much stronger. And don't forget that about a month, 6 weeks into the season, they're going to get Ronald Acuna back. So, those are just some of the teams off the top of my head. I think in the American League East, I think the Toronto Blue Jays are going to win that division. They added some pitching over the offseason. They brought Kevin Gausman in from San Francisco. Now Robbie Ray's not there anymore. He's out in Seattle with the Mariners. But that's a good pitching staff, and I think with their lineup, with Vlad Guerrero, with George Springer leading off, with Matt Chapman now coming over from Oakland and their fire sale, that's going to be a really deep lineup again. And I think the Jays have a really good chance of winning the American League, not only the Eastern Division, but the American League pennant.
So let's start there then, the American League East. So last year we had the Tampa Bay Rays winning the division, and I'm pulling up their roster. We are using Fangraphs roster resource to look at the projected rosters. There's still a couple days of spring training left. Like I said, because of the lockout and the negotiations taking a while and the shortened spring training, teams are really taking up to like a couple of days before the regular season. Normally you would probably see a little bit more happening right now and then a couple of days off, but they're using every second they've got. So these are projected rosters, and in terms of the Tampa Bay Rays, it doesn't look all that much different from what we saw last fall. You still got guys like Brandon Lau. Wander Franco's a guy who, they were saying on the Red Sox radio broadcast today during the game that they think that Wander Franco could be an MVP candidate this year. I'm really high on him. He's somebody I actually targeted for like minor league reserve type players. It's called the NA, the not active list for fantasy baseball. A couple years ago, I had him. I did not get him back last year, but I, along with a lot of baseball people, were right. Wander Franco is going to be a heck of a player as long as he gets himself healthy. In terms of their pitching staff, they have a lot of similar names. Shane McClanahan's coming back. They did add Corey Kluber, so if he can stay healthy, he might be a big piece for them. They are missing a bullpen piece right now due to injury. That would be Nick Anderson. But Tampa, Kevin Cash in Tampa, and their analytics department, they don't really rely on one particular piece, especially in the pitching department. So I don't think that's going to be a problem for them. That was your defending division champion. I believe they won it during the shortened season 2 years ago as well. But let's focus on those Blue Jays that we were talking about. And I agree with you. I think the Blue Jays might be the class of that division with guys like George Springer, Vlad Guerrero Jr., breakout Teoscar Hernandez. They've got Bo Bichette. They added Matt Chapman at third base. Their pitching's going to be, can it be as good as some of these other teams? They lost Robbie Ray. They've got Barrios. They added Gossman. Can Ryu stay healthy? And then, their bullpen has some names that people aren't quite as familiar with, but should be pretty good. That lineup's going to do a lot of damage. Are they good enough, do you think, to win on offense alone? Not saying they don't have the pitching, but they don't have the Garrett Cole necessarily. Do you think they can win on hitting alone?
Well, they don't. I don't think they're going to need to win on hitting alone. I think their pitching staff is better than people think. People forget about Alek Manoah, who was a rookie last year, who I think is an excellent pitcher and is going to just get better. You were talking about Tampa and Shane McClanahan, and they're going to get Shane Baz back, and he'll be playing his first full season. But as far as the Blue Jays are concerned, Manoah, Ryu, Gossman, Barrios, and they added Kikuchi from Seattle, who I'm not convinced is a great pitcher, but he's their fifth starter. So you add a guy like that who can pitch 180 innings and maybe get 28 or 30 starts, and he's going to help the back of that rotation. They added Yimi Garcia, who has pitched for the Dodgers and the Marlins and is a good setup man. Jordan Romano is going to start the year as their closer. And, their front office always makes moves during the year, so I wouldn't be surprised to see them make some moves to bolster their bullpen during the course of the year. And they may even do it in the next few days because we're seeing teams make moves. We've seen some moves here just today with Sean Manaea going to the Padres over the last 24 hours. There's going to be some things that happen. I think the Blue Jays are going to be better than a lot of people think. And you mentioned Teoscar Hernandez, and you referred to him as a breakout star, and they're projecting him to have 30 home runs this year. I don't remember how many he had last year, but he's a really good player. And I think a lot of people forget that he came from the Houston Astros. He's another Astros product. So the Astros with George Springer and Teoscar Hernandez now on the Blue Jays will have an impact on the American League East race. And I just think that's kind of interesting because, those two teams could end up playing in the American League Championship Series.
Yes, and I agree. Like I said, I agree with you on the Blue Jays, and they do have good pitching. It's...
Remember, in the playoffs, it's those top three guys that are the most important in the rotation. So for the Blue Jays, as we go into the season, their top three guys, in my opinion, are Barrios, Gossman, and Manoah. But Ryu, if he's hot going into the playoffs, and the fact that he's a left-hander, depending on who they may play if they make the playoffs, that matchup will dictate whether we see the three right-handers or Ryu gets into the mix. And I guess in this day and age, they go with a four-man rotation in the playoffs. It's not like it was in the old day. But if they don't win the division and they wind up in that first-round series, which is a three-game series, which, by the way, I think is formatted so that the team with the higher record plays all of its games in that first round at home.
Yes, it is a single park for logistics' sake.
So depending on what the matchup is, that'll dictate. And again, we're looking into the future. We don't know how these guys are going to be pitching going into the postseason. But just based on what I think Alex Manoah is actually their number 3 guy if you were going to rank them.
You and I were talking about a week ago. We were looking at fantasy baseball, and our buddy Tim's keeper league, he ended up keeping Kevin Gossman, and we were talking about how Gossman could be a real X factor, not just for Tim, but for the Blue Jays. He's never really done what he did last year, but if it's for real and it's to stay, yeah, you might lose Robbie Ray, but you got a pretty good pitcher there. So he could be a really big X factor in Toronto.
If he pitches the way he did last year, then they don't lose anything from Robbie Ray going to Seattle. And
No.
you can say the same thing about Ray in Seattle, because what he did last year in Toronto, he had never done before. So nobody really knows, but Seattle paid him an awful lot of money, and Toronto paid Gausman an awful lot of money to bank on the fact that they're going to be able to repeat what they did last year.
What we're seeing, I guess, is some teams saying, who aren't normally, the Red Sox, the Yankees, the Dodgers, saying, you know what? We're going to take some risks on some guys to get on this level. The Blue Jays have the offense. They have the firepower. They decided to take a risk on a guy like a Kevin Gausman to try to get on the level of the Red Sox and Yankees, which brings us to those Red Sox and Yankees. Boston is similar but also different than last year. They do lose Kyle Schwarber, who is a pretty nice piece at the top of their lineup. He's a guy that you and I never really thought would be the type of hitter he is. We thought he'd be more of a 20, 30 home run guy with a low batting average, but he really turned into a guy who can hit for average, and he played an adequate first base. Oddly enough, he's a better left fielder than a first baseman, but he took his talents over to Philadelphia. The Red Sox, however, went after Trevor Story. I think this move is twofold. They obviously want to get better. Second base was kind of a hole for them last year. Kike Hernandez, who they had signed to be their second baseman, they found out that he is probably best suited for center field. That doesn't mean it's a permanent move for them, but at this point it will be, because they now have Xander Bogaerts at short and Trevor Story at second base. The knock on Story is, what will he be outside of Colorado? I think he's a good player. There's a lot of players who, when they leave Colorado, don't drop off, but kind of normalize. They come up from their road numbers as a Rocky and down from their home, because they're not changing altitudes and playing conditions all the time. Sometimes it kind of levels out. They brought Jackie Bradley Jr. back in a move to try to help replenish the farm system more than anything else, sending off Hunter Renfroe, who had a career year. Kind of a criticized move, but the speculation, the explanation has been that they got a couple of prospects. They don't think that Renfroe was going to do quite what he did last year. Bradley's good defensively, and they have Jarren Duran down in the minors. So the lineup still looks good. There's some question about the pitching. Evaldi will be at the top of the rotation to start the year. Chris Sale has a small fracture in his side. He will miss some starts. He hasn't been healthy constantly for a while, but they did lose Eduardo Rodriguez, who's probably a high fours ERA pitcher but gives you innings. The rotation to start the year will be Evaldi, Pivetta, probably Houck, Waka, and Hill, with the possibility of Garrett Whitlock in that rotation. Honestly, Boston, they look like they did at the end of last year. They look like a team that offensively can help them defy the odds, but there's some question marks about the pitching.
I don't think their pitching's good enough the way it's constituted right now to win the division. I think they can get into the playoffs, and I say that because I don't think the Yankees pitching is reliable enough either, at least in terms of their starting rotation. I just don't think that as they start the year with Evaldi, Pivetta, Houck, Waka, and Hill, if that's what it is, I don't think that's good enough. Outside of Evaldi, you're not going to get 6 innings from any of these guys.
Pivetta, another guy who pitched probably above his ability a year ago. He wasn't bad all the time in Philly, but he seemed more consistent last year. It's going to be kind of a prove-it year for him.
You remember, he's going to have to face lineups like the Blue Jays, the Yankees, Tampa. That's a tough division to pitch in, and I don't see him as being any better than he was last year. You need a couple of aces at the top of the rotation. Now, they will get Sale back at some point, and later this year, maybe in the second half, They have James Paxton on their injured list after he had Tommy John surgery a year ago in April of last year. So he'll pitch at some point this year, but coming back from Tommy John surgery, there's no guarantees that he's going to be effective or what his role is going to be. They may get, a handful of starts out of him. I still think they may end up swinging a deal for somebody in the middle of the season. If
the Whitlock thing is interesting because there's really been no distinct direction coming out of Red Sox camp what they want to do with him. He was closing by the end of the year because All-Star Matt Barnes had been worn down throughout the season with how much he pitched. You could speculate on injury or not. There's a lot of talk that it's almost like Barnes should get the first crack at the closer and then Whitlock can kind of be the fireman, pitch wherever they need him. They did add left-hander Jake Diekman, who has been a closer, so he can face right-handed hitting. But if Whitlock sneaks into that rotation, that's another one of those, okay, how good is he? That's another X factor. But I agree with you. They're not exactly throwing in a new ace. They're not really replacing Eduardo Rodriguez's innings in this current rotation.
Well, two things about Whitlock. First of all, nobody knows how effective he would be facing a lineup 2 or 3 times. We know one time through he's really good. The other thing about it is if you take him out of the bullpen, you're opening up a gaping hole in that bullpen. And again, if you look at the rotation as it's currently constituted, if Whitlock goes in the rotation, he only pitches once every 5 games. But if he's in the bullpen, because you've got 4 of your 5 guys probably aren't capable of pitching 6 innings, getting past 5 innings on most days, you're going to need him in the bullpen. So he's actually probably more important for them as a bullpen piece than he would be as a starter. And if you take him out of the bullpen, you're taking a chance that he's going to be able to pitch as a starter 2 or 3 times through the lineup. And since you don't know that, that's a big gamble. Unless you go out and you get another piece or 2 for your bullpen to fill whatever hole he creates if you move him into the rotation.
Another loss the Red Sox had was Adam Ottavino, who's not as effective as he once was, but the point is he's gone. You take him out, you did add Diekman as a lefty, but if you take Whitlock out, you don't have that guy in Ottavino. They've got Barnes, Diekman, Whitlock, Brazier. They're going to see how Matt Strom does, another lefty, and Sawamura, who was up and down last year, hasn't had a great spring.
He walks too many people.
They don't really have. They did try to use him in the playoffs in a tough spot, and it didn't work out against the Astros. They just don't really have the pieces to take a Garrett Whitlock out of that bullpen right now. They're just thin on pitching. Their offense might keep them in the race, but they're going to have to make some moves at some point. As for those New York Yankees you were talking about, after Garrett Cole, it's a mystery in their rotation. Jordan Montgomery, who you and I both like, but he's clearly not an ace. Luis Severino, who's had health problems. Nestor Cortez and Jamison Tyone. I mean, on paper, it's not a bad rotation, but that's assuming no injuries, and there's some injury trouble there. The Yankees did bring back Anthony Rizzo. They got rid of Luke Voit. They moved him on to San Diego. Joey Gallo is still with them. They have added Josh Donaldson via trade. They have added Isaiah Kiner-Falefa. You and I were talking earlier today that they really like Gleyber Torres more at second for defense than short. They don't think he's that great an infielder. Kiner-Falefa adds better defense. They moved on from Gary Sanchez finally, which you kind of thought was coming. Higashioka should be the main catcher there. But the guy who's kind of not listed in the lineup is DJ LeMahieu, a guy who can fight for a batting title every year. I was saying I think maybe he should play over a Joey Gallo, but the Yankees, as they've even said on their broadcast last year, not everyone's going to be healthy all the time. There's going to be a hole, and they'll figure it out as they go. They have a good lineup. Some of their players were a little frustrated that there weren't more additions, but would you say there's more or maybe fewer question marks about the Yankees than the Red Sox?
I think there are fewer, but not that many less than the Red Sox, and they're different kinds of questions. I do think that LeMahieu is going to play. I think they're going to have to figure out a way to get him in the lineup and get him 450 or 500 at bats because he's such a good hitter, especially, if they do what they're talking about doing, which is leading off Josh Donaldson and then going Judge, Rizzo, Stanton, Gallo. Well, I think they'd actually put LeMahieu in the 5 spot because of how effective he's been in spring training when he hits in the 5 spot. They've been trying him out there. Anyway, Gallo is one of these, he's either going to walk or hit a home run, and they think he can hit 40 home runs. You got to figure out a way to get LeMahieu in the lineup, and we've watched this over the past few years. Inevitably, somebody gets hurt and people play. So I'm confident that he'll play. The only question I think that the Yankees have is, if people can stay healthy and if Gallo can hit for a little bit higher average. I think another thing that has been apparent in spring training is, and people don't talk about him at all, but Aaron Hicks, who's their center fielder, who's an excellent defender, he's healthy now. He's hitting in spring training. I think that his health has affected his hitting over the last couple of years. If he can stay healthy, that's going to be a really, really big factor. I think the rotation is all going to be determined whether or not Luis Severino pitches up to his potential. When he came up, he pitched really well, and he's had injuries almost every year. He's missed significant time. He's never been able to duplicate what he did in his best season. And if all of a sudden he's back to being 100% of what he was at the beginning, that changes the entire complexion of that rotation, because Montgomery can win 14 or 15 games. Cole, he's going to post up. He's going to put his 30, 32, 33 starts in there. And Nestor Cortez is a much better pitcher than people may think. If Luis Severino pitches well, if he pitches and if he can win 15, 16 games and get that strikeout ability back, then you're looking at a really good rotation, and it changes the Yankees' entire season. I think that's the key to their rotation. It's a lot of pressure on Luis Severino. I think the other guys are going to do what you expect them to do.
So, looking at the AL East, I think you and I are probably about the same. Blue Jays for the AL East division, I'm guessing, is going to be your prediction.
I'm going to pick the Blue Jays. I think their lineup is, I don't see any reason why they can't put up big numbers again. Those are good players. It's not about one guy. They don't play with the type of pressure from the media that the Yankees and Red Sox play in. They just go out and play.
They have some other X factor working for them too this year that a lot of people aren't going to think of. The last 2 years, they've been jerked around with the the regulations and whatnot with COVID rules.
In Canada.
They will be in their home park as of right now with fans in the stands,
right,
with fewer, if not, even though they're not going to have the same protocol looseness as teams in the U.S., they also have a little bit of a home field advantage that if you have a player that's not vaccinated, they can't cross the border, as we've seen with hockey with a guy like Tyler Bertuzzi. Right. So now teams like the Red Sox, Xander Bogaerts wasn't vaccinated. He got vaccinated for competitive reasons. I'm not sure the Anthony Rizzo situation. I know he wasn't at one point, but the Blue Jays do have that currently in their favor. So they've got some things working for them. Now, I'm not going to count out the Tampa Bay Rays quite yet. They're a hard team to judge because they don't necessarily always do it on paper, but they do it in the standings. So we'll come back to teams like them and the Red Sox and the Yankees when we kind of try to pick a couple of wild card teams. But for now, we're going to pencil in. I'm writing this all down here on a open office document. We got the AL East going to the Blue Jays. Both of us agree on that. Moving on to the Central, I don't see any reason why the Chicago White Sox at 93 wins can't do the same or better. I will walk through their roster, but looking at the other teams, Cleveland didn't get any better. Detroit's getting better, but they're not a playoff team. Kansas City has some nice pieces. I think the Minnesota Twins, who finished with 73 wins and 89 losses for last place in that division, might be their best competition right now.
I think the Twins are going to be better. They've got some young pitchers. They've got Joe Ryan's going to be a good pitcher if he can stay healthy. He's actually going to be their opening day starter.
They added Sonny Gray.
Sonny Gray was excellent last year.
Dylan Bundy is on this staff. He has had some up and down moments, but
Well, they're taking a chance that they can fix him.
Him and Chris Archer, who's older and dealt with injuries. If you get him healthy, you never know. Their bullpen's got some nice pieces like Taylor Rogers. A lot of people don't know him. And then their lineup, Byron Buxton, Jorge Polanco. They add Carlos Correa. You've still got guys like Sano and Kepler. You add a Gary Sanchez, Gio Urshela at third base. Even though you're taking Donaldson away, Urshela's a nice piece.
I really don't know if Gary Sanchez is an upgrade for them because Garver
was a power hitter as well.
Garver is a power hitter. He's with the Rangers now, and he was hurt a lot of last year, and I think he had about 220 plate appearances. So he didn't play as much as he would normally have played last year. And so the Twins, I think the Yankees are paying some of Sanchez's contract, and the Twins took him off the Yankees' hands, and they traded both of their catchers. They traded Ben Rortvedt to the Yankees in that deal, and they traded Garver to the Rangers. Ryan Jeffers is a prospect catcher of theirs who played a lot last year and is a really, really good defensive catcher and a pretty decent hitter. He should get a little bit better. But Sanchez is going to play a lot because of his bat and because he can hit home runs. And it'll just be a matter of how much he catches and how much he DHs. I think on days where he doesn't play as a catcher, he'll DH.
Yeah, and he's not known as a good defensive or game calling catcher. But teams that have trouble, they try to shake it up. The Twins are shaking it up. I don't think I'm putting them in my wild card discussion quite yet. They're going to get better. They're better than they were last year, but there's some. They can do it. I think they're a contender. I don't think they're a pretender, but I don't think they're quite a wild card team. I still like Tampa and maybe what Boston can do before them.
I think Boston's going to be fighting for the last playoffs.
I do too, and we're going to get back to those in a little bit because there's some change out west. But first, the Chicago White Sox, who I think really you have to consider them to be better than last year because they're going to be a little healthier than last year. You're going to get a full season of, tentatively, Luis Robert, Eloy Jimenez. They just added A.J. Pollock, trading off Craig Kimbrell. They thought last year around the deadline, they have Liam Hendriks adding a Craig Kimbrell who returns to all-star form with the Cubs last year after a couple of really bad years. They thought that would be a great bullpen punch. It's like bringing in the old Stratomatic Eric Gagne card. If you just throw those two closers down, you got a few innings taken care of. But it did not work out that way. Tony La Russa talked about how he felt uncomfortable with Kimbrell not being comfortable as a fish out of water. So they moved him to the Dodgers where he can try to become a closer again. I
don't think they're done building their bullpen.
I don't either. They've got Liam Hendriks and then Aaron Bummer, and they brought in Kendall Graveman. He was Seattle's closer before he went to the Houston Astros at the trade deadline as a setup man, and he did fantastic.
I think in middle relief, right, their middle relief is where I think they're going to have to add something. Now, they do have Kyle Crick in camp.
I was just looking at his name.
And if he makes the team, that would and pitches well.
Former Pirates closer.
Well, he's a pretty effective guy in terms of what you expect out of middle relief. So the problem that that Tony La Russa is going to have is that for the middle of the game, if he has a starter that makes a short start and he needs a left-handed pitcher for an inning or so, he doesn't really have one. You don't want to deploy Bummer that early. So they may go out.
They actually do have one more reliever that you and I are both looking at Fangraphs here. Joe Kelly is injured right now.
That's true.
He will be back. He can pitch multiple innings. So when they get Joe Kelly back, that's one more piece for the back end of that bullpen.
And he is definitely part of the team.
Yes, he's just injured currently. Now, news today from the White Sox, they did lose Lance Lynn for a couple of weeks due to a small tear in his knee. He's not supposed to be out for the season, but it's dangerous when you start talking about the knee. So currently, you'll have Lucas Giolito, the young Dylan Cease. I think Dallas Keuchel bounces back. He's not going to return to his Astros form. He's older now, but he can't be as bad as he was last year. And then Michael Kopech And currently they're listing Vince Velasquez as the 5th starter. We'll see what they do if Lance Lynn becomes a problem. He is a guy who, when he's on, he is an innings eater and a horse. He was an all-star last year. Mm-hmm. But as we saw with the Cardinals, there's times where you can have these little nicks and aches and pains. I'm not talking about the Tommy John season, but he can get banged up here. He's a big boy. Sometimes those guys' bodies pitching fall apart as they get older. So that's going to be something to watch for them. But I think they still have a rotation that can let them, especially with the division they're in, just waltz through the season and into the playoffs. So I'm going to guess that you're going to agree with me, but are we calling the White Sox the AL Central champion?
Well, I think by default they win because I don't think the Tigers or the Twins will progress enough to take the division. I think the Twins are going to be better than they were last year, and I think the Tigers are definitely going to be better than they were last year. They're a much better team with their young rookies and a couple of the additions that they made. Riley Green, unfortunately, broke his foot the other day, and he was going to be a starter in either center or right field for them. And Spencer Torkelson's going to be their first baseman. He's a former number 1 overall draft pick who can also play third, but he'll be the Tigers' first baseman. I think the Tigers are going to be much better. Tariq Skubal's got a year under his belt. I think he'll have a good year. Probably is their best pitcher. Casey Mize will be back in their rotation. I think they're going to be better. I think they have a chance actually to be a 500 team. I think the Twins have a chance to be a little bit better than 500, but I don't think either of them have enough to challenge the White Sox. What would have to happen for the White Sox, and you mentioned earlier that Eduardo Rodriguez is with the Tigers now, so definitely their rotation is better than it was last year just based on that alone. But I don't think, unless barring more injuries to the White Sox where they're just surviving to get their players back, more than just Lance Lynn going down and Joe Kelly being on the IL right now. I don't think the other two have enough to challenge them, and the Indians are a long way away from being competitive again. So.
Yeah, and if they trade Jose Ramirez at some point, which I don't get the vibe that they are planning on it.
Yeah, well, yeah.
But if they were to do, I've actually heard that they're talking about an extension for him that they want to build around him, but. It's not out of the question. If they were to trade him, they'd be even further away. But now, having said all that, I don't think, there's a lot of talk when teams are in a bad division, like, well, they're not that much of a real contender in the playoffs. I think this White Sox team could win a World Series this year, but we're going to have to see them stay healthy and get after it as well.
Yeah, I mean, the problem with talking about this stuff in the first week of April is that nobody knows what kind of trades are going to be made or changes to the team. We all know that teams at the end of the year are considerably different than they are when we talk about them before opening day. So all of these teams, if they're in contention, are going to do things to make themselves better, and we don't know what they are. I mean, look at the Braves last year. They lost their entire outfield to injury, and their general manager rebuilt the entire outfield, and one of the players that he acquired to rebuild that outfield, Jorge Soler, wound up being the MVP of the World Series. Adam Duvall, another player that he acquired in that outfield rebuild, wound up leading the National League in RBIs. So we don't know what these teams are going to look like. We can only talk about what they look like now.
Now, it's a good transition because as we head to the AL West, the Houston Astros won that division. They've kind of been the class of that division for a few years now. Sign-stealing scandal aside, they've got a pretty excellent core going back through even the 2015, talking about guys like Bregman and Correa, who recently left, Springer, who left a few years ago, still have Altuve, the young Yordan Alvarez, Gurriel, Michael Brantley, the veteran, who's always a good hitter, but got young guys like Kyle Tucker coming up, like I mentioned, Alvarez, but they're going to be a little bit different because their pitching is a little bit different. This was the question people had in the playoffs. When the Red Sox kind of jumped on them early in the ALCS, people thought they were done because their rotation was not quite the same as it could have been. Lance McCullers is going to be out for a while. He is always an injury risk, but he's good when he's in there, but he's not going to be the start. They brought Justin Verlander back. We don't really know what he's going to be, but you and I both get the feeling he'll probably be fine. They do have Framber Valdez, Urquidy, Luis Garcia, and Jake Odorizzi. So they have a rotation, but it's not quite what they were looking at a few years ago with like Cole, McCullers, Verlander before the injury. But the glaring hole for me, I think, is going to be what are they going to do at shortstop? Alex Bregman will probably stay at third base, but can he get back to MVP caliber? The Astros have a few questions for me. Meanwhile, on the other side of Texas, the Rangers went shopping. The Rangers haven't been all that good for a few years, and they went out. Their rotation's still a little bit of a question. They're kind of the light version of the Colorado Rockies. It's always hot in Texas, and they do have their new stadium, but it always seems to be a pitching concern there. But they added Marcus Semien, Corey Seager, Mitch Garver. They've still got Lowe and Adolis Garcia. Brad Miller had a nice spring for them. He might be an option for them in their lineup. It's a pretty nice lineup for Texas. The Angels did some work as well. They have the MVP Ohtani on both sides of the ball. Trout, Jared Walsh, the young guy at first base. They'll have Anthony Rendon back. Joe Adele will be in right field. And now they're looking at their young Brandon Marsh. He will probably start the year in left field rather than his natural position center because Trout would like to stay in center field. If you get a full season out of Trout, everything's on the table. One guy for the Angels that could make them into a real contender could be Noah Syndergaard, who is back from surgery. He will be ready to roll in their rotation, the former Met. And they've added their bullpen. They've got guys like Raisel Iglesias, Tepera, Mike Myers. They've added Loop, Archie Bradley. I mean, the Angels look better than they have in a few years. And finally, the other one that was a contender last year was Seattle. I'm not going to go over Oakland because they have not spent any money. They've sent so many players off to other teams. They're probably not going to be much of a factor this year. You never know. They seem to come up out of nowhere, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say Oakland's kind of your dog of the division. Seattle went out and got Jesse Winker. They've got a hopefully healthy Mitch Haniger. They added a Eugenio Suarez. You're going to have Kelenic for the whole season this year. He was a prospect, and you already mentioned Julio Rodriguez. Again, question for them, what about your rotation? They add Robbie Ray. They've got Marco Gonzalez, a Chris Flexen. So this is going to be a little bit of an interesting division to watch.
I think you could have three teams out of this division make the playoffs. I think the Astros rotation is very good, especially when and if they get McCullers back. Framber Valdez is a very good pitcher. Luis Garcia is a lot better than people think. And Verlander in spring training has almost looked like the Verlander that was pre-Tommy John surgery, even at his age. So he's 39 years old now. So I don't see a weakness in their rotation once they get everybody back. Odorizzi's going to start the year in the rotation, and I think they'll just try to get 5 innings out of him. Their bullpen is pretty good, maybe not as stacked as it has been in past years, but they've got Pedro Baez now, who used to be with the Dodgers, and they've got Hector Neris, who used to be with the Phillies and has closed for them before, and Christian Javier is a good swingman for him. He actually, I think, should be in their rotation instead of Odorizzi, but he was so valuable to them out of the bullpen last year that they're going to start him off in the bullpen. I actually think that if you put him in the rotation with the other 4, Verlander, Valdez, Urquidy, and Luis Garcia, I think you'd be looking at possibly the best rotation in the American League. But
you think their rotation, even though I won't call it unproven, they did go to the World Series last year.
I disagree that it's unproven. Valdez is a very good pitcher. Garcia was, if people watch the postseason, they saw how good he is. I mean, we're not talking about guys that are going to go 8 innings like in the old days. So these guys are all going to go 6 innings, except for Odorizzi. And I think if you had Javier in there, he could go 6 innings. He started the year last year as a starter, and they decided to move him to the bullpen because they felt like he could be one of these guys that would be a bridge guy and pitch, multiple innings for him, which is how they deployed him last year, and he was very good at that. So it all depends on how comfortable they are with the other people in their bullpen, and whether or not for whatever reason they don't want to use Javier as a starting pitcher to start off the year. Their lineup is still very good even without Correa. Jeremy Pena's been very good in spring training. I think today he had a couple of home runs, this being Sunday, the Sunday before the opening day later this week. Kyle Tucker is a very good player. There are big things expected from him. So, this is still a really good lineup even without Correa, and I don't really see any weaknesses that they need to be too concerned about. They have the people. It's just a matter of them going out and performing.
Yeah, I think there's some extra pressure on Alex Bregman this year. He was kind of hurt up and down last year. You can write off some of the COVID 2020 60-game schedule with. That was when MLB was first trying to limit technology in the dugouts because of the Astros cheating scandal, which affected a lot of players. Then you had the limited resources from all the protocols and trying to keep guys away from each other during that season. So you can kind of write off some of his struggles there. But last year he was hurt. A lot of the fantasy sites are saying don't expect him to be a 40 home run hitter like he was in his MVP caliber season. But there's going to be some pressure on him to perform. He's one of the last men standing of the old guard. But even without replacing a guy like Springer entirely and seeing what Pena can do, so you're not ready to write off the Astros. Are they your division champion, or are you looking at one of these other clubs who haven't been in the playoffs?
I think the Mariners have a chance to win the division. I still think the Astros, on paper, are a better team than the Mariners. It'll depend on injuries and that sort of thing. I'd say the Mariners and the Angels are pretty close. The Angels have, if Trout and Ohtani and Rendon and those guys stay healthy and play up to the level that everybody thinks they can play to, that's going to be a really tough lineup to face every night. And they've got some supporting players in that lineup that people kind of take for granted. They're going to platoon Tyler Wade and Jack Mayfield at second base, and both of those players are very productive players. They'll bat down at the bottom of the order. Joe Adele, if he makes the next step, he's going to be awfully good.
I like this Brandon Marsh. He's not going to be a big power hitter early, but he hits the ball. His minor league stats say he's a good hitter. He has speed. He's projected right now to maybe platoon and hit sixth, but you never know where he could end up. And then if Rendon bounces back. So, yeah, they're definitely an interesting group.
Well, they are. One of the things you have to remember, if Adele hits, he may move up in the order. There's some talk that Jared Walsh is gonna hit down lower in the order. So, and remember, Joe Madden is the manager, so he's not inclined to just throw out the same lineup every day in terms of who bats
He'll
where.
try some things. They've got Ohtani leading off currently, but you could see, again, I talked about Marsh. If his average is there and he's stealing bases, you could see him get into a leadoff scenario and bump everyone down a slot.
One thing that if you look at the top hitters in their lineup, they get on base. Ohtani gets on base, Trout gets on base, Walsh gets on base. Anthony Rendon is still trying to capture the kind of performance that he had back when he was in Washington that made the Angels interested in signing him as a free agent. But he's had all kinds of injuries over the last few years since he's been an Angel, and so there's some thought that he might finally be healthy enough to give them what they're looking for. But he's an on-base machine when he's healthy. So you look at the top of their lineup, and it's very good that those top four that I mentioned, and then if Adele and Marsh take the next step, now that gives them a really, really deep lineup.
All right, so we have our division winners. We're going to go with the Astros as our AL West just because it's kind of one of those, they're there till they're not. They're still a good team. We got to pick 3 wild cards here. We've talked about a lot of teams. We've talked about Boston, New York, Tampa. I don't think Minnesota quite has it with this group. And then the Angels, the Mariners, and it sounds like for you the Rangers are still kind of a step behind, kind of like where the Twins are.
I don't think the Rangers have the pitching to compete for a playoff spot. I think the Mariners and the Angels have a really good chance of both getting in.
All right, so we're looking at I'm with you on those two. The Mariners barely missed it, and the Angels made some significant additions, and they're trying some young players. They just DFA'd Justin Upton, so they really are trying to move on to a younger, more athletic group. I have a hard time with the Boston and Tampa situation. Tampa, it's hard to say that they're not a playoff team, especially, like I said earlier, they're...
Now, the way we're talking, we both don't think the Yankees are going to make the playoffs.
No, it looks like they might barely miss. There's a lot of good teams.
I think the Yankees have a better chance of making the playoffs than the Red Sox do. Unless the Red Sox go out and get more starting pitching.
If Chris Sale were to come back healthy in a few weeks, or even in May or early June, and could stay healthy through the rest of the year, which is a question mark, just like Luis Severino's a question mark, they might have what they need to do what they need to do.
Yeah, I think for both of those teams to make the playoffs, the two pitchers you just mentioned,
that's their X factor.
They have to stay healthy, and they have to perform at the level that they're expected to perform at. Now, Sale, I think when he's healthy, there's not a lot of worry that he won't perform. Severino has never done it over a long period of time with the dependability that Sale has done it. So I think Sale's only, his only fallback is just that he needs to be out there pitching. If he's out there pitching, he's going to pitch well.
It's a really tough cut. We're gonna have to cut someone.
Who's
your first wild card? You're saying this team's in. There's no doubt about it. Who do you think's in? I kind of want to say Tampa.
Yeah, I think there's just.
I don't think they got worse.
I think their young pitching staff is McClanahan and Baz, and they made a real stealth move last year when they got Drew Rasmussen from Milwaukee, and he's made some adjustments, and he's going to be in their rotation this year. I think as an under-the-radar rotation, a lot of people they're not even talking about the Rays.
And I'm not...
They're going to do this without Tyler Glasnow, who's going to be pretty much out for the year.
That's true.
So I think their pitching's good enough. I think they would make. I don't know if they'd be my first wild card. I guess they'd be my first wild card. I'm going to pick them, and I'm going to pick. I think Seattle and the Angels are going to get in, and I don't think the Yankees or the Red Sox are going to get in.
Yeah, I have a hard time against Tampa. I mean, they were the best team in the American League last year.
Well, they've won 100 games 2 years in a row. So
they went to the World Series in
two of the last 3
the
years.
Shortened season.
Yeah,
it's hard to pick again. And again, I'm not one for analytics, but it works for that organization. It's really hard to say something bad about them. Meanwhile, I think I'm going to go the opposite route of you, and not just for argument's sake, but I do think Boston gets in. I don't think they're done. I think they showed a lot last year. I think they're going to get something in terms of pitching. Chaim Bloom is out of the Tampa system. He has shown with the Trevor Story signing he's not afraid to spend some money, but he also has shown that he's not afraid to try to squeeze a little bit out of some other guys. So I don't think he's done. I think he's going to find some people that might be in season. If they don't get Sale back, they're going to be in trouble. But I'm going to go with Boston, and this is in no particular order. I think the Rays are my first wild card. And I think the Yankees are going to find their way back into the playoffs. I think the Angels are next, and then the Mariners. I don't quite think the Mariners have enough to get there. I think they're going to be very close. I think the Angels do have enough to get there, but could use a little bit more. And I just think the Yankees, there's a lot of pressure on them this year. Cole was not good in the playoffs again. There's some pressure on Brian Cashman, who I think is one of the best GMs in the league. There's talk about will Aaron Boone keep his job, even though I don't think it's his fault necessarily, but I think the Yankees find a way to do it, but it's one of these almost like a lame duck contender. I think they're going to get it because they can, but if the Angels could be just a little bit better, they'd knock them out. They would not be one of my wild card teams in the previous format. I think the Red Sox will be just a touch better, and that's not me being a homer. I saw what the Red Sox did last year, and I think they're going to find a way to do some of it again, but they are going to have to add something. I think the Red Sox need to add pitching more than the Yankees need to add anything, but I think the Yankees don't. I don't think their margin for getting better is high enough because they have so many pieces. They're not going to have a lot to be able to get rid of. So, in terms of the American League, that's where we are. We've got the Blue Jays, the White Sox, the Astros, and the Rays. And then we are split on Angels, Mariners, and then I've got Red Sox, Yankees. Are we both saying the Blue Jays are our American League champion if we had to predict the season today?
I'm going to predict the Blue Jays and the Astros in the American League Championship Series, and I'm going to predict the Blue Jays go to the World Series.
I'm going to take Blue Jays in the World Series. I think they'll beat the White Sox, actually. I think the White Sox have what it takes to go to the ALCS this year, but that Blue Jays team is so scary, and I think they do have enough pitching to get it done. It's always about the pitching.
Oh, and I think they'll go out if they have to, and they'll make another deal during the year because they've shown over the last couple of years they've been very aggressive, and I don't think that's going to change. If they have a chance to nail things down, I think they'll make a deal.
Yeah, I agree with you there. So that's the American League for us. So our American League champion is going to be the Toronto Blue Jays in the American League, and we have our division winners. Moving to the National League, and the National League gets interesting because the National League, they're going to add a designated hitter, whereas they didn't have that before. Strategies, adding new players to every team. I don't think it completely changes the dynamic of the entire National League in terms of who's good and who's not as good. But
it forces them to go out in some cases and acquire a player who's an impact bat.
Agreed. That's a good way of putting it.
Not all teams have done that, but some have. Like, look at the Phillies. The Phillies have been very aggressive. Not only did they fill a corner outfield spot by going out and getting Nick Castellanos, but they said, we want a DH that's going to hit 30 or 40 home runs, and they signed Kyle Schwarber. So they went ahead and they decided, we're going to try to put an American League lineup out here, and we want our designated hitter to be a slugger. Some National League teams are going to use the DH spot to rotate or to platoon or to get starters off their feet once or twice a week. If you've got a team that's got a great hitting catcher like Will Smith out in Los Angeles, I imagine the Cubs with Contreras will have him DH once in a while. They'll use that DH spot for that purpose.
I said I was going to wrap around, but I think that's a good place to start the National League is in the National League East, where we had the Atlanta Braves at 88 wins as the division winner and eventual World Series champion, a team that looked good, rebuilt a little on the fly, and kept going. Philadelphia Phillies at 82 wins almost made the playoffs. Well, I say almost, but they were actually behind St. Louis by about 8 games. But they were in it for a long time. It wasn't until like that last week. It's kind of like when you watch a basketball game where you get down to that last couple of minutes and the score goes up from the free throws. The Phillies were in it till the very end. Then they weren't that last week, and they kind of rested a bunch of people, and it went further down. The Mets went out and got Max Scherzer. We'll get to the good old Mets bad luck in just a moment. But I don't think the Marlins or the Nationals really compete too much this year. You never know with that Marlins team because they did make a lot of noise in the 60-game schedule. But I think our 3 teams we're going to key in on are the Braves, the Phillies, and the Mets. And we'll start with the Braves. And the biggest news out of the Braves camp this year is now Braves legend Freddie Freeman finally got his World Series ring. He's going to Los Angeles to the Dodgers. There was talk about, he rejected a contract last year, and Chipper Jones said he should have just taken it. He could have stayed there, no pressure for the rest of his career. It sounded like the Braves did kind of what the St. Louis Blues did with Alex Pietrangelo, where they didn't want to wait around. They didn't want to get left out in the rain. They went and traded for Matt Olson and signed him. And a lot of people say that's not a bad move because he's younger. He's not the Braves legend. I don't think there's a lot of pressure on him because people know what kind of player he is.
And he's from there.
Yeah. So I think it's a good move. They are getting some players back. They brought back Eddie Rosario. They're getting Marcelo Zuna back from his suspension from the alleged domestic violence issues. He came out apparently the first day he was back in camp and apologized to his teammates. He had a press conference where he apologized. All the reports on his character from his days with the Cardinals are that everybody loves him. So whatever happened, it sounds like one of those, you're forgiven until you do something else again. He doesn't seem like a troublemaker generally. So he's expected to be back, hit for power. They brought in Alex Dickerson. They brought Duvall back.
Well, Dickerson's only going to play until Acuna gets healthy.
That's correct, and that's where I was going there. Acuna will be back at some point here soon, but they're taking it slow with their superstar, and I think winning the World Series helps that. If they had lost, maybe there's some pressure to get it quicker, but they just won, so they're going to take it easy with him.
Well, they have a pretty deep lineup, too. I mean,
they do.
Even without him, their lineup is really good.
They don't have Soler. He went to the Marlins, but everyone else is kind of back, and even with Freeman gone, because of Olsen, you're putting a similar player in.
Ozuna replaces Soler.
That's true, similar type player. They are going to look for some places to play the young catcher William Contreras, whether that is at catcher or there's talk of him going to the outfield at times or DHing. And their rotation's still pretty good. They did just lose Luke Jackson to injury, but they're going to have Max Fried, who's a great young starting pitcher. Charlie Morton's back for another ride. Kyle Wright, Ian Anderson, Inoa. And then their bullpen, they just added Kenley Jansen. Will Smith, the lefty who was their closer, is going to slide aside for Jansen. I don't think there's going to be as much forgiveness as there was in L.A. If Jansen struggles, they have another closer waiting in the wings. But they've also got Colin McHugh, Tyler Matzik, and A.J. Minter. And they just added Darren O'Day. So their bullpen's pretty stacked. This team does not look like it has a hole up and down this roster.
No, there's three really good teams in the National League East, and this is going to be like the American League West to a certain extent.
I think these teams are better, but I know what you mean, where it's going to be hard to pick one.
It is because they're all very good for slightly different reasons. I think the Phillies have an outstanding lineup too, which is going to be just as... And the Mets, I think the three lineups of those teams you can stack up against each other, and there's not going to be a lot of difference. I think it's all going to come down to pitching in the National League East, and nobody knows how that's going to go. The Mets already, with DeGrom being out for probably the first 2 months of the season.
For those who missed it, Jacob DeGrom has a stress reaction, and as I explained in layman's terms, they haven't said this, they're calling it the stress reaction, but let's be honest, you have a stress reaction in your shoulder, the bone of it, it's probably a small fracture, so that's going to have to heal before he can do anything.
But there was no structural damage in the MRI and the imaging that they did, but he is going to be out up to a month before he can pick up a baseball. And then
he has to rehab and get back in shape.
So his spring training is going to be the entire month of May. So I wouldn't expect to see him until June. Tyler McGill, who filled in the rotation for DeGrom when he was out last year, is going to take his spot in the rotation. Max Scherzer, of course, was signed as a free agent. So they've got Scherzer in there. They've got Taijuan Walker. They've got Chris Bassett, who they traded for a couple of weeks ago from Oakland, who I think he was a 16 or a 17 game winner last year. And Taijuan Walker, Carlos Carrasco fill out the rotation. That's still a good rotation if everybody stays healthy and they have a deep bullpen.
It seems like the Mets always have this problem. Someone's always hurt. Mm-hmm. They went, go back a few years to the days of the DeGrom, Harvey, Syndergaard, Matz rotation, and somebody was always hurt, if not more than one.
Well, ironically, DeGrom was the only one of that group that ever stayed healthy, but now
it seems like
he's had all kinds of problems.
Now, in their bullpen, they still have Edwin Diaz, and there's still some people who wonder if he can really hold on to that job all year.
No, I mean, he'll be fine. I think, when a closer in New York blows up, it's a bigger story than if it's a guy in Kansas City. But he'll still have 30 to 35 saves. And
they've got Trevor May. They added Ottavino, who, like I said, is better in name than in statistics now.
I actually think Seth Lugo's a better reliever than he is at this point. They made a trade today being the Sunday before opening day Thursday. They made a trade with the Yankees. They traded Miguel Castro to the Yankees for Joely Rodriguez, who's a very good left-handed pitcher, because they really didn't have an accomplished left-handed pitcher that they can count on in late innings for matchup situations. They've got Chasen Shreve and Alex Claudio, who are non-roster invitees, and one of those guys, probably Shreve, he's had a really good spring training.
Claudio had a lot of holes for the Brewers a couple years ago, so there's some good names there.
Drew Smith, who has had injury problems, but when he's pitched for the Mets, he's been very good. So I think they have a deep bullpen. If they get DeGrom back and they're over 500 when he comes back, then they're going to be in good shape, because I think when you have DeGrom and Scherzer and Bassett as your top three, that's a really good top three, and that would set them up, really, really well for the last 4 months of the season. But again, it's the Mets, and somebody else could get hurt before he comes back.
Their lineup, and I'll say beyond the lineup, because they have a lot of good hitters on their bench, is going to be very intriguing. Their owner seems to be like a second coming of George Steinbrenner. He's loud. He likes social media. Can we only imagine if George Steinbrenner had Twitter? It would be something like this. But he was disappointed when free agents like Steven Matz moved on to a new city or said no to the Mets. But they went out and added more and more pieces. They've still got Nimmo. They added Starling Marte, who used to be in Pittsburgh. Francisco Lindor is still there. He'll try to rebound as potentially one of the best middle of the order shortstops in the league. Pete Alonso, back-to-back home run derby champion. They've added Eduardo Escobar. Jeff McNeil trying to rebound from a year ago. I was hearing on the Mets broadcast today, they were talking about how McNeil has said he got caught up too much in the home run launch angle part of his game, and he's trying to get back to hitting normal, something we saw in St. Louis with Matt Carpenter, who got into a home run swing a few years ago and has never really recovered. And they also added Mark Canha. One of the X factors for them is going to be like a Robbie Cano, who's just not been around the team between injuries and suspensions. He looks like he's hitting the ball pretty good, but if he doesn't, they've got Dominic Smith, who was hurt last year. His production was down, but he was hurt. They've got a J.D. Davis, who's better against lefties, but they still have him. So it's a good lineup. I think that they definitely can contend. If I had to pick one of the two, it would be hard. Between them and the Braves, it would be tough. But that's the thing. We've got a third wheel here in Philadelphia. We were talking about them. They go out. They add a Kyle Schwarber. They've got Nick Castellanos now to go with Real Muto and Harper and Hoskins. You and I have talked about Bryson Stott, who looks like he's going to knock Alec Boehm out of the lineup. It's projected here on Fangraphs that it's a platoon, but they've got him. They got Johan Camargo also, if both of those guys kind of fall flat. And then their rotation. They've put together a nice-looking rotation. You still have Zach Wheeler, Aaron Nola, who's very, very good, Kyle Gibson, Zach Eflin, and right now they've got Ranger Suarez. They've put together a bullpen, including Corey Knebel and Familia and Alvarado and Brad Hand. But what's interesting is Dave Dombrowski is now in charge of that club. Dave Dombrowski went out and turned the Tigers into a super team without a bullpen, and they got to the World Series a couple times. He went out for the Red Sox and won the 18 World Series with them. Dave Dombrowski is paid to come in, sign players, give them a lot of money, trade prospects if needed, build a super team. He doesn't really worry about the bullpen. He kind of plays it like fantasy baseball. I can get bullpen later. I'm going to get the big studs. And eventually the team moves on from him because he cleans house on their farm system. But the Phillies owner wants a World Series. So this lineup could deliver it. For me, I feel like there's just a couple more holes here than the Mets and the Braves. I still think the Braves are the best all-around team in this division. That's who I'm going to pick. But what do you got here?
I think it's going to be really hard to pick one of these teams as the winner of the division. I think it's a dead heat. I think the Phillies are better than you think they are. I think their bullpen is better than you think it is. Dave Dombrowski went out and signed 3 guys who used to be closers: Knievel, Familia, and Hand, signed or traded for. So Knievel's going to be the closer, but when you've got guys behind him who have had closing experience, it's not like they're going to get nervous going out there in the 7th or 8th inning. So I think they've got bullpen depth in terms of reliability that they haven't had in years, and their rotation is better than it looks. We're looking at roster resource, and they've got Kyle Gibson listed as the number 2 starter, but that's not really the case. Zach Wheeler is their number 1 or their number 2 with Aaron Nola. So it goes Nola, Wheeler, Eflin, Ranger Suarez, and Kyle Gibson. And I think the reason that Wheeler is listed as the number 5 starter is simply because he got a late start to getting himself ready for spring training because of a couple of nagging injuries. And so he's going to miss a couple of 3 turns in the rotation. And so by the end of April, he'll be in the rotation. And, he got Cy Young Award votes last year. And I think he led the National League in innings pitched last year. He was one of the top 3 if he wasn't the leader. So I think this is a really good rotation. I think it's a very good bullpen, at least as good a bullpen as the Mets have.
I'll revise that. You're right. I've been talking about some of these Philly relievers for fantasy baseball. A couple of them are rebound type candidates, like Hand, Familia, and Knievel. Hand had kind of had a down year, but I'm a big fan of guys like
he's still
like
even if he pitches like he did last year, he's an upgrade for the Phillies in terms of what they've had out of their left-handed relievers.
I think the Mets get a lot of play on the names in their rotation and DeGrom and Scherzer. The Phillies,
those are the best 2 number 1 and 2 pitchers in the National League if they're healthy.
I think the Phillies do definitely have a good rotation. It's just a matter of, you're right, it's going to be hard to pick one of these. I'm going Braves. If you had to flip a 3-sided coin, what do you got?
I really don't know. I'm totally throwing a dart. It could be any of these 3 teams. I'm going to say the Phillies because I look at the top 6 guys in that lineup, and all of them are capable of hitting 30 home runs. The top 5 guys, they could just completely, in that little tiny ballpark, they could completely outslug teams. I think they have a chance.
You're stuck on this like I was stuck on the remaining American League wild card. I said that the Rays were kind of the obvious.
Well, one of the things about the Phillies is they're going to start the year out healthy, and the other 2 teams aren't.
That's true. That is definitely true. I think it's going to hurt the Mets more than the Braves because I think the Braves aren't much different from how they finished last year. But
the Braves still have some questions about what they're going to do in the 4 or 5 spot in their rotation.
That's true. So we have Phillies. I have the Braves. It's going to be tough. I think
all 3
no matter
of those
what,
teams are going to make the playoffs.
That's probably true. If you look at the rest of them, I don't see one of the NL Central teams as being better than either of those teams.
Yeah, and I don't think the Giants are going to be as good as they were last year.
No.
They lost Buster Posey. They lost Kevin Gausman to Toronto. Posey retired. I don't think the Giants will make the playoffs. So just like I know I'm jumping ahead, but I'm gonna call the Dodgers the National League West champion.
I agree there. We will get into some of the West, more like the Dodgers versus the Padres, and we'll cover the Giants a little bit. But we'll do the Central first, just to stay in order. The NL Central last year was the Milwaukee Brewers. They kind of have been a really easy pick for a few years here getting into the playoffs, not necessarily being a division champion. The NL Central's kind of been passed around. You had the Cubs for so many years in a row coming off of their World Series. But as their team has been shipped out, the Cardinals took it in 19. In the shortened season, the Cubs won the quote-unquote meaningless division in the 2020 season. And I say meaningless not to disparage the Cubs, but it was 2 months, and by the end of the line, the Cardinals and the Brewers were right on the Cubs. It's not like one of the divisions where one of the teams ran away with it. So
2020 was like watching the College World Series.
yes, so the Cubs did win that division that year, but last year it was Milwaukee with 95 wins, and the Cardinals were predicted last year to be the best team in the NL Central. They went out, they got Nolan Arenado. The idea was they were going to have Flaherty and Wainwright and get Miles Michaelis back, and it just never came together in the first half. We watched them roll Johan Oviedo and all sorts of other 4A or guys who were too young, not ready to pitch, and they lost most of those. All they had to do was win 6 more games all year, and they would have won that division and gotten out of that wild card game, but they didn't. They were inconsistent. They did find their way late. Man, there's a lot to cover with the Cardinals. They switched managers. There's talk that there were philosophical differences. Let me translate that for you. The Cardinals front office is interested in trying this analytics method, whether it be shifts or game scripting or pitching or an opener. Everything's been mentioned this spring. They switched to Ali Marmol, who is a really smart baseball guy, but the question is going to be how much is he going to be able to manage versus being the button pusher for a game script. Jack Flaherty is already out with an injury that he says is a small tear in his elbow that he has been pitching with for years, so he doesn't think it's that big a deal, but the reality is it's a big deal when a guy who's supposed to statistically be your number one pitcher is not there. They don't really know who their 5th starter is going to be. You've got Wainwright, Miles Michaelis, who was very good a few years ago, but did come back from an injury last year, so you got to see him hold up. Steven Matz was their addition this offseason. He's not really been seen as a durable pitcher, but when he's in there, he's good. Dakota Hudson, another guy who was durable a couple years ago, but now coming back from Tommy John surgery. You've got to see how he does. And then the 5 spot, which the Cardinals said they wanted Drew Verhagen to take that spot, but you and I both think Jake Woodford.
He's not been good in spring training. I really don't see how they can force him in there.
Jake Woodford, who started near the end of last year, has been very good. There's talk that he could do it, that they could use an opener method. Really, everything's on the table. The Cardinals clearly want to try some analytics. There's a lot of talk amongst the fan base as, will this damage them in the early part of the season, and then they'll figure something out late in the season, and it'll be like last year where they have to claw back. Problem is, they didn't have to deal with this version of the Mets and the Phillies last year, so there's going to be a lot more to claw past, even with 3 wild cards. I have a hard time trusting them. Their offense is going to rely on, is Tyler O'Neill as good as he was last year? He was a big part of that comeback last year. Is Paul DeJong going to rebound? He's been working with guys like Joey Votto to try to become better. At the DH spot, they did not go out and sign a Kyle Schwarber. They originally signed Corey Dickerson, who I like, but he's not a masher. He's just a really good hitter, but he generally gets platooned as a left-handed hitter. Who's the right side of that platoon? Albert Pujols is back for what they consider to be the last dance. Pujols, Molina, and Wainwright supposedly retiring at the end of the year. Albert really only hits lefties now, and he can really only DH, play a little bit of first base. I don't think the Cardinals utilized this new DH to get that much better. They said, we still think the lineup that was projected to be the best lineup in the National League Central a year ago is going to do that, and we're going to let it ride. They're kind of doing what the Red Sox did. They're hoping their rotation is good enough as is. They're hoping their lineup can continue what they did last year. It scares me, because if you look at Milwaukee, on the other hand, yeah, their lineup's not maybe as threatening. You've got Colton Wong still, an aging Lorenzo Cain. Is Christian Yelich going to bounce back? They had Andrew McCutchen. Willie Adames was good for them last year. They did add Hunter Renfroe. I like the Cardinals' lineup a little better, depending what some of these guys like Yelich do. This isn't the strength of the Brewers right now. Their strength is they have Corbin Burns, who won the Cy Young, Brandon Woodruff, Freddie Peralta, who was an all-star. I like Adrian Hauser more than a lot of people like him. And right now, Eric Lauer is their 5th starter. Let's not forget they have essentially 3 closers. The great Josh Hader, Devin Williams, who they think is a closer in waiting, and Brad Boxberger has been a closer at times. This team is hoping that they have enough offense and can pitch themselves back to the division.
Yeah, they've got the best pitching in the division, and they've got a really good rotation, one of the best rotations in the National League. And the bullpen is, you mentioned the three guys at the top of the bullpen. They've got a really good guy that Craig Counsell loves to go to in trouble spots in left-hander Brent Suter, and he can pitch multiple innings. Jake Cousins was good for him last year. Aaron Ashby is a starter in waiting who has really, really good stuff, throws really hard. He's another left-hander that they've got. So, they're a deep bullpen. I think their lineup it's not like the lineups we talked about in the National League East with Philly, New York, and Atlanta. But it's still a good enough lineup that's going to generate runs. And really what's really interesting about the Brewers, when you talk about the Brewers and the Cardinals, who are obviously the two teams in the National League Central, it's the weakest division in baseball now.
The Reds tore down, and the Pirates and the Cubs didn't get better.
But when you talk about the Brewers, what's interesting about the Brewers in relationship to the Cardinals is the Brewers are now what the Cardinals have been over the last few years, and that is pitching and defense. They're a good defensive team, better than they've been in years. They went out and got Hunter Renfroe, who's got a great arm and is a good defender in right field. It allows them to move Yelich over to left field. Kane, even though he doesn't hit the way he used to, is still one of the better center fielders in baseball. And, of course, it was an add for the Brewers and a subtraction for the Cardinals when Colton Wong a year ago signed with the Brewers. So you've got, arguably the best defensive second baseman. I know Tommy Edman won a Gold Glove last year at second base, but Wong is he's awfully good, and this is still a good enough lineup that with their pitching, I still think they're the favorite to win the division, especially with Flaherty hurt and the fact that I highly doubt that the Cardinals during the course of the season, based on how they operated last year, are going to go out and try to swing a big deal with a team to add to their team. When they needed pitching last year, they went out and got aging veterans, J. Happ and John Lester. And if that's the way they're going to go, I can guarantee you that if the Brewers need something, they're going to try to get a big piece. And they also added Andrew McCutchen, who's still a very serviceable player who's going to see some time at DH and in the outfield. So, he's a winning player. He's still a productive player. And I think the Brewers will probably still be able to win in that division because the Reds are tearing down and the Pirates aren't very good. And the Cubs maybe can play 500 ball this year. I can see the Brewers winning 92, 93, 94 games. And the Cardinals maybe still winning 90 and battling to get into the playoffs. I'm not sure the Cardinals are going to make the playoffs this year.
I have a hard time picking – we'll get to the wild card part, but I'll have a hard time picking anybody outside the NL East as a wild card. Maybe we'll get that one extra – we haven't done the West yet, but – I always like to use the floor-ceiling thing. The Brewers, to me, look like a decent ceiling, but a very high floor because of that pitching. I don't think they're going to be bad. The Cardinals are a little more volatile. They have a very high ceiling.
They have no depth for their pitching.
Their lineup is very good, especially if it can replicate what they did in the second half last year and the early parts of April and May a year ago. Remember, they led the division early before the injuries happened. The pitching is what's going to make that floor sink. I don't want to be a homer and take them just to take them. I do think at some point what we're going to see is Nolan Gorman come up, and he might be their X factor. I think they can win this division. I think they were tracking to win it last year, even without Flaherty, and I think they do have more pitching depth than they did a year ago. I think they can. I think the Brewers are a safer pick is the problem.
Let's put it this way. I don't see the Brewers not making the playoffs with that pitching rotation.
That's true. That's kind of where I'm at. I think the Cardinals, it's going to come down to how the Cardinals play. I think the Brewers are going to play exactly as you say. If the Cardinals play to their potential, they will be better than the Brewers. If they cannot solve some of these issues, or if they get too caught up in the analytics department and play outside of what they do, they're going to be their own worst enemy and they're going to fall flat. And they'll be scratching for a wild card spot that they might miss. So I'm gonna take the Brewers just because I think they're a safer bet. I might be still taking the Cardinals in a wild card spot, but for now, I'm probably going to lean with you just because of that pitching. I don't think the Brewers lineup is bad. I think it's good. I don't think it's great. If Yelich gets healthy, they do have a very dangerous lineup. If they don't, they can manufacture runs, and I think their manager knows how to do that. And they're an interesting team because they do a lot like what I say Alex Cora does with the Red Sox. You can tell that the Brewers use some analytics, but they also can take things at face value. They can see with their own eyes and know when, okay, this guy's just really good. Let's just pitch him.
You made a really interesting point there, and it made me think. We know what Craig Counsell can do as a manager. We don't know what Ali Marmol can do as a manager or will do as a manager. And by the way, I think Craig Counsell is one of the. I don't think guys in the industry are underrated or overrated, but nobody talks about Craig Counsell. He's an excellent manager, and because he was the kind of player, and people remember him as a player, he was one of these guys who was lunch pail, get dirty kind of a player who had to squeeze everything he had in order to stay on a team's roster and make himself as good a player as he could just to survive. He knows how to manufacture runs. He doesn't rely on 3-run homers, and him along with their coaching staff do a good job of manipulating the pitching staff. I mean, let's face it. Craig Counsell is the guy who basically said to Josh Hader, I know you want to be a starter, but we're going to turn you into what Andrew Miller has been in the past. And they've turned him into the best relief pitcher in baseball. And now he's got the best reliever in baseball, 1A in Devin Williams, backing him up. So, I just think there's so many questions. The Cardinals' best pitcher is on the injured list. We don't know when he's going to be back. And they have a new manager. And I think Craig Counsell has done this before. He's got players that have done it before. I just think that they have less to overcome than the Cardinals going into the season. That doesn't mean that they're not going to run into obstacles along the way. But again, I think their front office is more willing to go out and
they'll make the big splash if they need to.
And they've always done that. I remember years ago when they went out and got CC Sabathia so that they could make the playoffs. They'll do something if they have to do it. And I'm not so sure that the Cardinals will do. They'll do something, but I don't know that it'll be as big as what the Brewers and all teams. When you get into, August and September, if you have the opportunity to make some sort of move, and I don't know what the trade deadline date is this year, but when you get to that trade deadline, if you don't do anything, you're going to regret it.
I'm pretty sure it's still July 31st, the end of July, but so I think you and I both agree the Cardinals have to play their way to win the division. The Brewers don't really have to be perfect to do it. Now, the Cardinals can make some changes to their roster, whether that be a young guy like Nolan Gorman or just going with somebody like a Jake Woodford. But they have a few more obstacles to navigate. Pitching cleans up everything.
I don't think they did enough to help their pitching staff. They didn't do what they really needed to do.
They didn't clean the bullpen.
They didn't go out and get any of the bullpen pieces that we've been talking about that other teams have gotten. You look at the Angels; they went out and got Tepera and
Joe Kelly to the White Sox.
The Angels made more than one move in their bullpen. By the way, they made multiple moves in their bullpen. The Braves went out and got Kenley Jansen. The Dodgers went out and got Craig Kimbrell and a couple of other guys when Jansen left. But the Cardinals didn't do really anything in their bullpen of significance.
At one point, the White Sox had Hendricks, Kimbrell, and Graveman. Now, they decided eventually they didn't need all three and that Kimbrell would be more comfortable somewhere else where he could close. But the reality is, you have these teams going out trying to get 2-3 closers, and the Cardinals are saying, okay.
Well, the Cardinals are saying we don't even know who our closer is.
That's correct.
Even though their best relief pitcher is Giovanni Gallegos.
I don't know what they're going to do with Jordan Hicks. They're talking about using him potentially as an opener.
Yeah, I think that's a foolish move.
And you and I are thinking it, but we haven't said it. Alex Reyes, who was their all-star closer in the first half, who was clearly burnt out in the second half, is on the extended injured list because of arm troubles. So we don't even know if he'll be back.
Well, I mean, look, you look at his history, and he's every year he gets hurt.
Last year was even though he wasn't good in the second half, the fact that he pitched the whole year all the way till the literal last pitch of their season, that was an accomplishment for him. So I think that might be the area they need to improve the most. I think they have the pieces for a rotation unless something catastrophic happens. They just need to stop, playing around with the math book and put somebody who's a starting pitcher in that last spot in the rotation. But so we've got the Brewers, and we'll talk about the Cardinals in wild card conversation. But let's move to the NL West. We both pretty much already outed it. The Dodgers are going to win this division. They add Freddie Freeman to an already World Series contending team. They've got Mookie Betts, who's won an MVP. They have Trey Turner from the trade last year. They did subtract Corey Seager, but they do have Turner. Gavin Lux is now going to play second base. There was question about where Chris Taylor would play, but with A.J. Pollock going to the White Sox to add Kimbrel, Lux jumps into the lineup. They've still got Justin Turner. Max Muncy, who was hurt at the end of last year, is ready to go. He's going to probably DH to start, but that team's very versatile. They can move around. They're probably going to have Edwin Rios on roster. Austin Barnes is their backup catcher, another good catcher. Their rotation still looks pretty good. They have Walker Buehler. Clayton Kershaw is back. Julio Urias. They added Andrew Haney, who wasn't anything thrilling last year. They've still got Gonsolin. And if you look at their bullpen, they added Craig Kimbrel. They've still got Blake Trinan. They added Daniel Hudson, who seems to be one of these ageless wonder relievers. He doesn't throw hard, but he knows how to do it. They still have Brewster Gratterall. A few years ago when the Mookie Betts trade happened, Gratterall was supposed to go to Boston in that deal, and Boston didn't like something they saw on his medical record. So they technically could have given up just a touch more and gotten Gratterall, but they didn't. And the Dodgers told the Twins, no, we'll take him. We'll give you something and we'll take him. They still have David Price. I don't know if he's going to be a part of their rotation at any point.
Well, I think early in the year, I think he's going to be somebody who is a bridge pitcher for some of these short starts. We should,
And he's, he gets some flack for personality here and there, but he's apparently a really good teammate. He told the Red Sox in the 2018 World Series run, pitch me whenever you want, even if it's the day after I start. Even if it's to start again. He told the Dodgers as soon as he got there, I want to be a starter, but if you need to pitch me somewhere, pitch me. So he's going to be a factor somewhere. We just don't know where. Dave Roberts is another one who he's not afraid to use analytics, sometimes more than he should, but he's also not afraid to try some things. So it's hard to predict there's an element of Tampa Bay Rays to how the Dodgers function, but they do it with an all-star team. So there's not much to analyze here. They're probably going to win the division. They had 106 wins last year to the Giants' 107. They couldn't catch them in that last week. The Giants, meanwhile, as you mentioned, they subtract Buster Posey. They still have guys like Brandon Crawford and Brandon Belt. I was listening to an interview with Mike Krukow. He thinks that this team really can be built around those two. Jock Peterson was added, but they're interesting because again, another team that's kind of built on analytics with their manager and Gabe Kapler and Farhan Zaidi, who came from the Dodgers. They're very numbers oriented. They think they can squeeze it out of this team, but they don't have their ace from a year ago in Gausman. They do still have Logan Webb, who's very good. They have Carlos Rodon, who finally stayed healthy for the White Sox last year. They have Anthony DeSclafani, who's gotten very good. Alex Wood, Alex Cobb, whatever Andrew Bailey, the former Oakland closer, has done as a pitching coach out there, it's worked wonders. Really, aside from the question marks of what the bullpen roles are going to be between Jake McGee, Camilo Doval, Taylor Rogers, Dominic Leone, it's not a bad team. I just don't see them doing what they did last year. And they're kind of using that as bulletin board material, but I don't see the Giants I just don't see them as good as last year.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think because of their lineup they can generate the kind of offense they did last year. They're missing too many pieces, and
And I also didn't even mention Chris Bryant is on the Rockies, so they added him for extra pop last year.
Right.
It doesn't mean they won't do something like that again, but just the way they stand right now, they're not quite the same.
I think their rotation's very good. The way they operate their bullpen is basically the last two guys, the closer and the setup man, are the only ones who have a defined role. The other guys are all interchangeable, but they do a good job. And I think they'll be good, and they might contend for a wild card spot. But I think it's going to be between them and the Padres for one of those wild card spots. And if the Giants get it, it'll be because of their pitching. And if the Padres get it, it'll be because they've got a better lineup.
Now, looking at those Padres next, they were a team that kind of disappointed. You know, they beat the Cardinals in the wild card series in 2020, and a lot of people thought, man, this team's going to challenge the Dodgers, and they didn't. The injuries got to them. They didn't put it together. Now, their rotation is pretty impressive. They do have Yu Darvish. Joe Musgrove was really good last year. They just got Sean Manaea. Blake Snell could bounce back, but Mike Clevenger's still coming back from injury, and we'll see how he is. Paddock, who was supposed to be a big part of their future, has not been good.
Well, he's been in trade rumors the last few days.
So they have a good top three. Can Joe Musgrove do it again? Darvish and Manaea, they don't really have that true ace until Clevenger comes back and we see what he is.
I think Darvish is better than you think he is.
That's fair. He's good. I don't view him like Walker Buehler, but he's definitely still a good, reliable pitcher.
Yeah.
They have some good relievers in their bullpen. We'll see what Dinelson Lamet, who was supposed to be a stud in their rotation, but injuries have derailed him, but he's still a very dangerous pitcher with very good stuff. This website, Fangraphs, lists him as an option.
Well, nobody knows who the closer is going to be, but Bob Melvin, who's their new manager, who used to manage the A's, has hinted that Robert Suarez, who did some closing over in Korea, is probably going to do a lot of the closing.
They had last year. It was Mark Melanson who has moved on to Arizona.
Yeah.
2 years ago, during the COVID season, they used a couple of different people, but then eventually got Trevor Rosenthal. Now, Rosenthal he was with Oakland last year but never pitched. He got hurt. It'll be interesting to see if he signs somewhere. The lineup of the Padres is very good. You have Trent Grisham. Manny Machado has returned to form. Jake Cronenworth is very good. They added Luke Voit to be a DH. Eric Hosmer is still part of their team. He's not quite what he used to be, and they've added Jorge Alfaro, who could platoon in there somewhere. Will Myers, still a very reliable player. But there's a name I'm missing here. And that's Fernando Tatis, who got hurt in a motorcycle accident. And injuries are becoming the story of his career. This team was built around Machado and Tatis. They will not have Tatis for a significant period of time. I don't think that will hurt their playoff chances too much. I still think the Dodgers, whether Tatis is healthy or not, were the favorites. But this is where they go from being, they're a wild card team, to fighting it out with some of these other teams that we were already talking about. St. Louis, Philadelphia, Atlanta, the Mets. So we said Dodgers. So I'm going to move on from the division here for a moment and say, who are our wild card teams? You said Phillies in the East. I said Braves. Is it fair enough to say that the Braves and the Phillies are both going to be in the postseason?
Well, that's what I said. I said all three of those teams in the East, the Mets, the Phillies, and the Braves will make the playoffs. I think the Phillies have a really good chance to win the division. I'm probably the only one who's going to predict that. A lot of people are picking the Braves. I think the Phillies are better than a lot of people think they are. And again, Dave Dombrowski will go ahead and go out and get another piece if he has to, because that's what he does. And so the Phillies will win the division. The Braves and the Mets will make the playoffs.
And I agree with you. I think all of those teams are better than who I think we're kind of down to as our final two, St. Louis and San Diego.
No, I don't think the Cardinals are going to make the playoffs.
Not at all?
I think the Padres will make the playoffs. I think the Padres start the year with a better team than the Cardinals overall. Okay, the Cardinals lineup is a good lineup, but I think by the middle of the year when Tatis comes back, when you look at the Padres lineup, and you know what? When you look at them, right, they made a deal yesterday for Manaea, who pitched today against Oakland and his old team, and he looked fine. He's a good pitcher. So they've strengthened their rotation, and they got a starting pitcher, which the Cardinals didn't really do. I mean, I know they signed Matz, but if you could pick between Manaea and Matz, you'd take Manaea 99 out of 100 times. So when they get Tatis back and they've got that lineup intact, and they've been trying to trade Hosmer and Paddock over the last couple of days, so it sounds to me like they're still trying to add another bat to their lineup before Tatis comes back. So they're being aggressive about it. And when I look at all of that, I think their team as a whole is a little bit better than the Cardinals, and I'm gonna say the Padres are the other team that gets in.
All right, so we've said, like I said, he said Phillies for the NL East, and I said Braves. So both of us are taking the opposite of whatever team. So Braves and Phillies both get in as division winner and probably top wild card. And then the Mets. So all three NL East teams are going to make it. And I agree, I think all of those are best. So that leaves us one wild card spot for debate. He's taking the Padres. I'm still going to take the Cardinals. I think last year's team, what they were supposed to do, I think they have a little bit more direction in terms of pitching this year, oddly enough. Gosh, there's so many X factors and just strange details about the Cardinals with the Schilt and Ali Marmol situation and analytics. But, you went in last year with Flaherty, Wainwright, and then it kind of got dirty with a Carlos Martinez who was never right, and John Gant and Ponce de Leon. And this year, at least you kind of have a direction for your rotation, even if you got a spot open, even though I still think Jake Woodford will be really, really good there.
Well, if they would just put Jake Woodford in
that'd be a question you can just eliminate.
I think that would make things a little more stable. But I'm also gonna say this, and the Cardinals needed to win 17 games in a row to make the playoffs last year. They need to play better out of the gate this year.
Well, remember,
because they're not going to do that again.
Remember, last year at mid-May, I was in Myrtle Beach, and they were playing the White Sox, and Tim was our man on the street at the White Sox game. The Cardinals were in first place, and it wasn't until they lost a few more pitchers, and then the lineup really started going cold mid-season that they started to have a lot of trouble. If they can get some sort of serviceable pitching, and I mean out of what they have, and then maybe add something later. We haven't talked about Liberatore, who doesn't quite look major league ready yet, but could step in at some point. We talked about Woodford. Maybe they go get somebody. I've talked about Gorman. I just think that what we tried to see last year is something that we can still see this year out of their lineup with the Goldschmidt and Arenado, and we'll see if Tyler O'Neill and Harrison Bader keep up what they've done last year. I think the Cardinals could still be a little bit better than the Padres, but it's hard to say. You can convince me either way on that. Either way, it's going to be a tough mountain to climb for the Cardinals, since they doubled down. They felt like we don't have to improve that much, because if we play like we were supposed to a year ago, we're already better with the same roster. Now, the problem is with Albert Pujols, there's the accusation that they went out and got him to sell tickets. The Dodgers used him as the left-handed pitcher side of a platoon late in the year when Max Muncy was hurt. If the Cardinals run Albert Pujols out there every night, they're going to probably have a good problem on their hands with, he doesn't hit righties the same way he used to. If they're determined to try to make this into the Michael Jordan last dance, then they're going to create their own issues. This analytics thing, if they're more carried away with it than they think they are, they're going to create their own problems. If they just hunker down and do what normal baseball people do, and if we're all overreacting to how they're doing things this spring, there'll be fewer question marks, and they'll have a better chance of winning. So either way, I don't think either of those teams, the Padres or the Cardinals, are going to be my National League champion. Who are you taking to the World Series?
Dodgers against
the Blue Jays.
The Blue Jays.
So you're saying Dodgers. Boy, I'll tell you, it's hard not to pick the Dodgers. I do like the Braves. I still think they're good, but I mean, let's look at it. The Dodgers, they were one win from the World Series. Actually, I want to say, as I scroll up here, that was the only... No, they were 2 wins away. The only series that went the distance in the entire playoffs last year was the Dodgers-Giants series, went 5 in the division series. Everything else was 4-game in division series or 6 games in both of the league championship series. But if the Dodgers have a Clayton Kershaw, who had his back act up on him again, and he had to miss his last start, and a healthy Max Muncy, you could have seen them getting over the Braves. So I'm going to say the Dodgers as well. And they're not afraid to make a move. If they don't think they have enough starting pitching, because they went out and got Scherzer last year, they'll do it again. So I'm with you. I'm going to take the Dodgers. They might be the low-hanging fruit, but I'm with you there. We got Blue Jays and Dodgers. I got Blue Jays over White Sox in the ALCS. You can pick a National League team if you want that you think the Dodgers are going to beat, but really, I feel like the National League is a little more...
Well, I think the Dodgers will end up playing one of those teams from
the East. Yeah.
And then, although, you know what, the Brewers could make it because if a couple of their rotation pitchers get really hot that time of the year, they can shut anybody down.
That's kind of how they were doing it in 2018, when they took the Dodgers 7 games, but they also had MVP Christian Yelich. So it's a nice playing field across both leagues. There's a lot of contention, teams in contention. There's a lot to choose from. If we were down to the 2 wild cards in either league, it'd be really tough to pick who's not getting in.
I think it's going to be, by the way, it's going to be really hard for a wild card team to get to a division series now, because the first round they're forced to play all the games on the road. That's going to be hard. Is
home field advantage a thing in baseball?
It is in the first round.
That's fair.
Because of the way they've set this up now, where that's the biggest thing about the first round now. The 1 and 2 seeds get a bye, and the last 2 seeds in each league don't get to play a home game. So there's definitely a home field. If you're the wild card team in any of these series starting this year, since it's a best of 3, you have to win the first game. If you don't win the first game, it's going to be really hard to win a series.
It's interesting when we have these conversations. Now, you and I are on the same page about there should be fewer teams in like all of these playoffs in the leagues. We're doing the NCAA tournament where it's fun because it's all one and done games, but hockey goes on for 2 months, basketball for 2 months. They're adding teams in football. Now we're adding teams in baseball. I used to think, I grew up during the single wild card days and didn't like that we were adding the second wild card. But as times went on, I liked the 2 playing the 1 game play in game because it really did punish you for being a wild card. This format does punish teams in some ways even more, but you're also letting more teams in, so it could cancel out some. You have been in favor of having 4 divisions and go into that. And then you have your 4 teams and you just go straight to the division series. But Lord knows the almighty dollar and TV contract is what is driving the playoff formats. I'm just glad we didn't get the Selection Sunday show where the top team in each league is picking their opponent.
Now, I guess. Pardon me for interrupting. I guess the wild card team with the best record is going to get to play at home, aren't they? Because the 2 of the 3 division winners get a bye.
So looking at if you have the...
Or is it just the top
The top division winner is going to play the worst wild card team at home, and then I would say the top wild card team plays the second wild card team at home, and those teams will go on to play the top two teams in their league. So one of the wild card teams.
The top wild card team essentially gets the same privileges as winning the division.
Yes. So, any way you cut it, there's some downside to it, in my opinion. They put too many wild cards in. They wanted 14 teams.
Well, that'll happen in 5 years.
Yeah, if that.
That'll happen at some point because they're just incrementally adding playoff teams.
Can you go out on a limb and pick a world champion between the Jays and the Dodgers?
I'm going to go with Toronto.
All right, so you're going Toronto. I like that, and I think they are. I think they're going to be aggressive enough to go get more if they need to. So we're going to say the Blue Jays are going to beat the Dodgers. And when reality happens and all this comes crashing down, because I picked Kentucky, who lost on the first night of the NCAA.
Look, the thing about baseball is it's a long season, and everything changes when people get injured.
How many times have you heard us say, well, if the Red Sox go out and get so-and-so, or if Chris Sale's healthy, or if the Cardinals, if everything falls into place that they already have.
Well, a good example of all this, and the season hasn't even started yet, is the New York Mets, which thought that they were guaranteeing that, by going out and getting Max Scherzer, that they would have the best 1-2 pitching combination in the National League. And then Jake DeGrom gets hurt, and, he only pitched half a season last year. And he may, if he's lucky, pitch a half a season this year. We don't even know if he'll pitch again this year because he's starting to become prone to major injuries. So, you can go out and get people, but it doesn't guarantee anything.
We're missing out on having Tim here because he had to work, unfortunately. But this is where I would have him look up who are the betting lines for the different world champion odds. And let me see if we can find that real quick. I'm going to guess the Blue Jays are pretty far up there. I don't really have any MVP or Cy Young candidate votes predictions yet. I don't think I don't really do well with that. The same guys as last year: Ohtani, Vlad Jr. for the American League. A lot of nice candidates in the National League. So let's see if we can find out who are going to be our world champions according to the betting world. All right. I am on Sportsbook DraftKings. So we're using DraftKings. I usually use Yahoo and BetMGM, but we're using DraftKings and Sportsbook because that's who's right here. So the number one team, and this won't surprise you at all, is the Dodgers. They are plus 475. Followed by the Toronto Blue Jays, then the New York Yankees at plus 900. So the Sportsbook thinks the Yankees have a better chance than we do. Then you get at plus 1,000 the Astros and the Braves. Then the Mets at plus 1,100. The White Sox at plus 1,200. The Brewers at plus 16. And the Rays at plus 1,700. Then you get into the Padres, the Red Sox, the Phillies, the Giants, the Angels. The Cardinals are plus 3,500. Mariners, Twins, Tigers, and so on and so on. Your least likely team to go to the World Series is plus 30,000 for both the Baltimore Orioles and Pittsburgh Pirates. So if you want to bet $1 to try to win,
Well, that's never going to happen.
I know.
You're wasting $1.
It's $1 you can put. You actually have better odds if you take that $1 and put it in the scratch-off machine.
You can have lunch for that $1 at McDonald's.
Oh, if that were still true.
Well, you can get something off the dollar menu for $1.50.
I will tell you that Mr. Bradshaw has put some sort of money on the Cardinals because he just does it every year. That's for fun. It's not with his head, it's with his heart. He puts a little bit of something on the Cardinals and the Blues to win it all. We'll see how his Blues bet goes here in a couple of months. But so the Dodgers versus the Blue Jays, that's who we were picking, and that's who the Sportsbook is picking. So From there, we're about to have a fun baseball season. It is going to be the first season without any major protocols, full capacity to start the year.
Don't jinx it.
Yeah, that's true. But here's to a fun baseball season. Whoever you're rooting for, enjoy it. If you're a Cubs fan and your team just tore down, still enjoy that you're watching baseball. It's like nothing else. You and I talk about how, we go to Blues games.
We didn't talk much about the Cubs, and I think they're going to be better than some people think they're going to be because they went out and got a couple of nice pitchers, Drew Smiley, a couple of other pieces, and I think they'll be better than some people think they will be. I think they'll at least play 500 ball, so I think they'll be entertaining. And sometimes when you're not expecting much, those seasons can be a lot of fun. And I think when those kind of teams, by the way, can cause a lot of problems for other teams that are in a position to compete for championships when they overperform. So I think the Cubs will be better than a lot of people think they will be.
Yeah, that's fair. There's no pressure on them. And who knows? Maybe they make some moves. Look what happened to the Giants last year. People didn't think they'd be anything, and they were. But either way, whoever you're a fan of, enjoy the season. It's not like anything else. We talk about how we go to Blues games, and it's, okay, we're there, and you look in the shop, and you wait till warm-ups, and then you go sit in your seat, and you watch the game, and you go home. And I love a good hockey game. Playoff hockey is one of my favorite things. But when you go to the baseball park, you're outside, especially if it's nice out and it's warm. You're just enjoying, the atmosphere. It's festive. You enjoy your game. Maybe you go get a drink afterwards because it's summertime or dinner. On a daily basis, you can listen to it on the radio as you're doing stuff during the daytime sometimes. It's every day. It's for baseball. For me, baseball is you come home and it's always there for you. Like your cat or dog, it's always there. It's something to look forward to every single day. It's one of my favorite parts of the year. Coming up here on Thursday, it's going to be New Year's for us. So thanks for joining me today. We'll get Tim some opinions from Tim next time, but thanks for coming on.
Well, thanks for having me.
This has been StraussNet Sports Radio. I hope you all enjoy baseball season. We'll be back as we get into it, and probably when we get into hockey playoff preview time, the mayhem that is the few months of hockey playoffs. If you've never been to a hockey playoff game, go. It's just pure insanity. But for now, enjoy your baseball season, and thanks for listening to StraussNet Sports Radio.
Don't blame us if we ever doubt you. You know that we